Adam and Eve were now left without sons, one murdered and the other living with the consequences of his choices. So Adam and Eve did what was necessary to continue with their lives, having faith in God's loving care and plan. In time, Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters, including their third son, Seth, who God had appointed as another seed in Abel's stead.
On June 20th, 1987, in the mountains of Ararat, Turkey officially recognized the discovery of Noah's Ark. Located on a mountainside about 15 miles south of the volcanic Mount Ararat, the remains of the massive ship were dedicated during a special ceremony. Guest of honor was Ron Wyatt, due to his 10 years of research at the site. The story began in 1957 during the Cold War, when aerial photos taken of eastern Turkey while searching for Soviet missile bases revealed a strange boat-shaped formation in the mountains about 6,300 feet above sea level. Life magazine reported on the story after an expedition from the United States went to the site in 1960. Blowing holes in the strange formation, the members of the team came away with the conclusion that there was nothing there of any archaeological interest. Ron Wyatt, like many others, read the story, but he was of the opinion that the site needed further exploration. There had been many claims of seeing Noah's Ark on the volcanic Mount Ararat, but Ron knew that it was a stratovolcano, and he believed that nothing would have been able to survive there. He noted the biblical account of the location of the Ark. And the Ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Urartu, the biblical Ararat, was a large region in eastern Turkey. This location was certainly feasible. But the factor that captured his interest the most was the length given in the Life magazine story, 500 feet. Most people were looking for a 437-foot Noah's Ark based on the Hebrew cubit, but Ron again went to the Bible to learn more. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. Moses was the author of the Genesis account of the flood. He would have known the cubit of the Egyptians. The Hebrew cubit didn't come into existence until there was a Hebrew nation after Moses' death. The Encyclopedia Britannica stated, "The Egyptian cubit is generally recognized as having been the most ubiquitous or universal standard of linear measurement in the very ancient world. The royal cubit equals 20.62 inches. This would mean Noah's Ark was much longer than 437 feet. 17 years after the Life magazine article, Ron finally made the journey to Turkey. When he saw the boat-shaped object, he saw that it looked just like it did in 1960, and he knew he would need permission to excavate in order to learn anything about what was beneath the surface. So he returned home and enlisted a number of friends to help him pray for an earthquake to reveal more. In late 1978, he learned of an earthquake in eastern Turkey and returned in August of 1979. When he arrived, he was overwhelmed by what he saw. The earthquake had dropped the soil around the object, and a large crack extended the entire length. He could see what looked to him like the remains of decayed rib timbers along the now exposed sides. Also, he was able to measure the depth of the debris and measure the length. It was 515 feet, or exactly 300 Royal Egyptian cubits. He was now convinced. He carefully combed the surface, looking for evidence that it was a shipwreck. He saw what he believed were petrified structures of an ancient ship whose deck had collapsed. He saw what looked like deck joists and deck support timbers. Of particular interest was the fact that the ship appeared to be impaled on a large outcropping of limestone. He concluded that this indicated that the ship had slid into the rock from another location. There was no longer any doubt that this was the remains of something man-made. In late 1986, the Turks announced their decision. The ceremony was set for June 1987.
John, as a scientist, might I take the liberty here to ask you, do you really honestly believe that you have been on remains of Noah's Ark?
I have no doubt in my mind. This has to be a man-made structure. It's full of metal. Metal has a regular pattern to it, and the size of the thing and the shape of the thing is such that it's almost certainly a large boat.
Our plan is to start in this area and then maybe go to the other area 600 kilometers away and do some investigation there. I will work in collaboration with local scientists. What we do when we find important things is we publish it in serious books and publications and journals where we can show serious, rigorous work done. Once the scientific community knows, we can make it available to the general public. We want the general public to know our findings.
Mount Ararat, Turkey, we've had astronauts climbing Mount Ararat. We've had satellite photos. The world's attention's been focused on that particular mountain, which, by the way, stands all by itself. It's just, there it is, right out in the middle of the plain, right?
It's interesting because Genesis 8 verse 4 says, as the waters receded, the ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. And it's true. If you look on a globe or a map, it shows Mount Ararat in Turkey. What it doesn't show is it wasn't named Mount Ararat until 4,000 years after the flood. If you go to Wikipedia, in the 11th century, the Armenians started calling it Noah's Mountain. Then in the 13th century, Marco Polo was traveling across Turkey on the way to China. When they said, this is Noah's mountain, and Noah's Ark is on this mountain, he said, well, then that must be Mount Ararat, and wrote Ararat in his book and on the map, and that was the first time that was called Mount Ararat.
So, by extension, they came up with the name of the mountain. This is Noah's Mountain, therefore it must be Mount Ararat.
That's right.
Backwards logic.
But the interesting thing, the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says it landed in the mountains of Ararat, but it doesn't say Turkey. The first two clues that we have a problem is it says mountains, plural. And except for Mount Ararat with little Ararat being right alongside of it, that's the only thing that there is for mountains out there. And the next verse is even more specific. As the waters continue to recede, the tops of other mountains all came in.
Yet despite the enormous temptations of a corrupt and pleasure-seeking world, Noah chose the straight way in obedience to God. Was Noah sinless in his actions or choices? By no means. As every man that had ever lived, Noah also sinned and fell short of God's glory. But was Noah able to stand before any man, any judge, any court, and in the face of his accusers, be without blame and above reproach? Absolutely. Noah was a man of integrity, who was fair and just in his dealings with anyone. The overall character of Noah's life is recorded on the rest of the earth. Was appalled at what he saw, disgusted with the abuse of the free will he had so lovingly granted to his creation. Inspired history records a welling up of regret that the faithful Creator felt for the direction His creation had chosen in their lives. In His justice, God proclaimed a verdict of guilt upon all those who had disobeyed His teachings.
And God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth."
Such a sentence of totality could only be made by the one who was responsible for it all. Would God continue to see sinful man ravage each other and degrade humanity's value? God's answer was issued.
And behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die.
The punishment for mankind's wickedness would simply be water, falling from the sky, springing from the ground. But it would be far greater than a spring shower. Instead, it would take the world by storm, literally, cover it completely, and prevail across the globe totally. God was going to plunge the world into a worldwide flood. But with His justice, God's mercy would also be extended to Noah and the few righteous souls whose attitude and conviction for goodness, kindness, and righteousness had found grace in the eyes of the Lord. God conveyed to Noah the details of the sentence that He would enact upon the earth. But with it, He also made an offer for protection. God said, "I will establish my covenant with you." This covenant offered by God was one of protection and salvation from the judgment that the world deserved. But it would also place an immense responsibility on Noah. In understanding the timeline of Noah's life, it seems that this covenant with God came near the time that Noah and his wife were establishing their family, about the age of 500. Men and women of Noah's day lived very long lives, but in comparison with previous generations, Noah was a fair bit older than others. A fair bit older when his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth were born. Perhaps this age provided Noah with greater wisdom to fulfill what God would be requiring of him. Being offered protection was merciful, but how was it that Noah could avoid such a natural, all-encompassing, catastrophic flood? The flood's pronouncement was upon all flesh under heaven. There were no mountaintops to scale that would be unaffected, no distant lands to retreat to. As always, though, God's plans were not lacking. His covenant with Noah was complete, addressing both his actions and provisions, as well as what would be Noah's required duty, the making of an ark. Making an ark. It may have seemed like a simple enough task to Noah, but then again, what's an ark? In a literal sense, he understood the word to be a chest, a box, or a barge. But in terms of a flood, a vessel for saving his family, Noah had never heard of, seen, or even been inside such a thing, let alone constructed one. For that matter, Noah had never seen any catastrophic flood of water, especially comprehending enough water that could consume the lands of the entire world. But of course, God's covenant was complete, and He never left His people without proper instruction or guidance. The huge structure, the ark, was progressing, coming together. It was no longer an empty frame or an odd array of posts and beams. Its exterior was almost complete, lacking only a few more sections to seal up with pitch. Each deck was taking shape, with rooms and compartments, hallways and walkways, railings and cages. It was an empty place, large and expansive, with long passageways joining one end to another. but the enormous project was coming together. The final cargo would be the provisions needed for both man and animal to survive. God released the downpour, opening the windows of heaven, and caused the great fountains of the deep to break forth from below. For 40 days and nights, the waters came without ceasing, raining from above and rising from below. In these 40 days, the waters increased and lifted up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. As the waters greatly increased and prevailed across the earth, the ark moved about on the water's surface. All the high hills under heaven were covered by the exceeding waters, until every mountain was submerged beneath the surface by at least 15 cubits. At last, the 40 days ended. The rain from heaven was restrained. The windows of the heavens were stopped, and the fountains of the deep were sealed. Every inch of land was hidden deep beneath the waters. All life that depended on land, whether living on it or flying above it, perished. From the day the rains began and the floodwaters rushed across the earth, the land stayed submerged for a total of 150 days. This period of time was sufficient for all life to be destroyed, except what could survive in the now global sea and the life that was existing within the floating ark of safety. When these first 150 days had been completed, God's remembrance was upon Noah, his family, and all the animals that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters subsided, receding continually from the earth. As the waters decreased, the ability for the bottom of the ark to clear the mountaintops also decreased, and it came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The ark's days of moving and floating with the wind and the waves was over. It was now fixed in place for the remaining duration of their stay, until Noah and his family would hear from God that the earth was again at rest.
The ancient town of Hebron, with over 200,000 people, is the largest city in the West Bank.
Along with all the market activity and commerce comes high security and tension. That's because this city has the tomb of Abraham, so sacred to both Israelis and Palestinians.
Here, Jews live literally atop Palestinian Muslims as the two communities struggle to be near Abraham's tomb. And it's all about this very sacred and complicated site. An ancient structure capped by a medieval church which now functions both as a mosque and a synagogue, holding the tombs of Abraham and praying among the tombs of their great patriarchs. And the other half is a mosque, where Muslims worship before their shared patriarch with equal fervor. Its exquisite minbar, where the imam stands to give sermons, is a rare original from the 12th century, with inlaid wood and no nails. Unfortunately, this holy place's history has a tragic aura.
I think the most important thing about Abraham is that he's our forefather, and he's the forefather of really everyone in the world, although we don't really think of him that way. But one of the things we've learned about genetics is that we're all related. But he was also the father of monotheism, the first messenger of God to speak about the fact that there's only one indivisible God, that idols don't hold any power. For instance, Muslims know that Abraham traveled to Arabia where Hagar and Ishmael were living, and that he and Ishmael built a house of worship. But most Christians, most Jews are not aware of that. Jews, on the other hand, know that there was a third wife whose name was Keturah. But in general, Christians and Muslims and often Baha'is are not aware of that. So everybody has a piece of the story. It's fascinating.
An historical puzzle.
It is a historical puzzle.
What span of time are you talking about in your book?
Well, amazingly, I'm talking about 4,000 years. It's an incredibly long period of time. Abraham was born about 4,000 years ago.
Peace on him the day he was born, and the day he dieth, and the day he shall be raised alive. And make mention of Mary in the scripture, when she had withdrawn from her people to a chamber looking east, and had chosen seclusion from them. Then we sent unto her our spirit.
Listen to my words carefully. O people, your lives and your property are sacrosanct until you meet your Lord, as are this holy place, this holy day, and this holy month. Whoever of you is holding a trust, let him return it to its rightful owner. Wrong not, and you shall not be wronged. All bloodshed from the pagan age of ignorance is to be left unavenged. But if they abide by your rights, then they have the right to be fed and clothed in kindness. Do treat your women well, and be kind to them, for they are your partners and committed helpers. You have taken them only as a trust from Allah, and you have their enjoyment only by His permission. So listen to me in earnest, O people.
Oh, what a wonderful world this would be if we all open our eyes to see. He is all that we need right now, and we can all come together somewhere, somehow. His door is open no matter who you are. Just take the first step, you'll see it's not so far. Down this road that holds all the answers, open your heart to something greater. His holy book speaks pure and true, and always tells us what we must do. His last prophet was sent as a guide, an example by which we abide. There is salvation for those who seek to find the one and only source of peace, and understanding of why we are here, who created us, who we must fear. So what a wonderful world this would be if we all open our eyes to see. He is all that we need right now, and we can all come together somewhere, somehow. Such different people from different lands, we're all descendants of the first man. We can be one nation facing one God, with no hatred, no envy, no